Secret Circle.
And welcome to The Secret Circle with me, Dr. Luke Deckard, the podcast where I chat with authors, filmmakers, musicians, and more about the art of their craft and let you in on some of their secrets. Today's guests are the host of SPYHARDS. Special Agents Scott and Cam are here chatting about podcast, spy movie landscape, and maybe a little bit of 007 and Mission Impossible. So without further ado, let's bring the two agents on. Hello.
Hello.
Hello there. Thank you for having us on the show. I love that it's called Secret Circle. I mean, we like secrets here.
But we're bad with secrets, though. Like, we give them all away. That's why we're terrible spies.
That's all right. You know, someone has to be the one giving the secrets away so that, you know, things can happen.
We're creating job opportunities for other spies.
Exactly. Yeah. Someone has to sell the secret. You should be selling them. That's what we should be doing. Be smart with your secrets and how you give them away.
Well, I'm not going to tell you I was selling secrets.
Yeah, back alley. You gotta like whisper, hush, hush, exchange packages.
Yes, well, I'm glad to get you guys on, and I love listening to your podcast, and you know, you review a whole bunch of interesting films from like the big hitters to, you know, ones I've never heard of, and it's quite fascinating because, you know, I love spy movies, but you know, your guys' investment in that genre is far beyond my scope. But yeah,
some could say tragic.
You know, someone's got to do it. Someone's got to do it. So, but as we kick off, I would actually love to hear about how you two met and began the SPYHARDS, you know, journey.
Well, that is a question for the ages. It goes back beyond spy movies. It goes back to a beloved franchise, much like Bond, that's soon to turn 60 itself, which is Star Trek. And there's a little bit of connective tissue between the three of us because I see some Star Trek models in your background there, Cam's background, and there's some sitting above me right now. Cam and I met about 11, maybe 12 years ago now.
It was 2013.
Okay. 10 years ago. It just feels like longer for me, clearly. At a Star Trek convention in Las Vegas. So not in any of our home countries. I'm in England. He's in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And we met at a Star Trek convention of all places.
Yeah, and we just became regulars at the Star Trek convention, the biggest one in North America. It's held in Las Vegas every year. And we would go on vacation together. We had like a group of about 10 of us, 8 to 10, depending on years, fluctuating. But we would meet up every year, and we're going this year as well. And so we'd known each other for, I guess, like 7 years or something like that. And then the pandemic hit. And that was kind of when the podcast wheels started rolling, because I had been doing a Star Trek podcast since 2014, I think. And we were just like, hey, there's a pandemic on. We obviously can't go out and party in the streets like we normally do. So we might as well start a podcast.
Well, it also is timed with, I did a rewatch of all the Bond films. I hadn't watched some of them since I was a kid, and I think there's a couple I probably hadn't ever watched. And I went and bought myself like the Blu-ray set, and I thought I'm going to do them all sequentially and watch them all through. And I knew Cam was a fan, and I basically just texted him my thoughts every time. So I got to the end of You Only Live Twice and was like, "What the hell am I watching?" And just text him all my thoughts on it. And it just became like, well, I want to connect with Cam and I want to do something, and let's talk spy movies. Well, actually, the original idea was talking about Bond.
Yeah, it was going to be a Bond podcast initially, but when you've got shows out there like James Bonding, for example, or a lot of the other big, you know, fan-driven ones, it was just like, there's a crushing amount of competition.
Yeah.
And you're also dealing with like 25 or 27 movies, and then, you know, episodes of James Bond Jr. and I don't know, we could cover the novels but like it's very limited. And so suddenly the idea of spy movies was like, wait a second, then we could talk about Mission Impossible movies. We can do Jason Bourne. We can do Johnny English. And then we can like tackle all these obscure things that no one knows the names of.
Yeah. and thus SPYHARDS was born.
And I mean that was it. There was a couple of other
Epic.
names at some point. We threw around some names. For Your Ears Only was one, but I just put that in the intro line instead, basically, and just save that for that. Yeah, but it was just an idea of just sort of talking about films and also just trying to find a way, because it's about having a mission as well. Like, we're not just going to talk about films. We want to try and create the list of the best spy movies ever made.
Yeah.
So we're going through and looking at every single spy movie ever made that we can get our hands on physically, or sometimes digitally, and reviewing it and putting it in front of people.
Yeah,
exactly. And like that became, frankly, it's a dirty secret of the SPYHARDS podcast internally, is that the episodes we have the most fun with are the ones around movies that no one's ever heard of, because there's pressure when you're doing, I don't know, No Time to Die. Like, people are like, I want to hear the definitive conversation on No Time to Die. So then we are sweating behind the scenes, and who's the perfect guest for this, and we've got to have our research nailed down 100% and all that sort of thing. Whereas when Scott and I are tackling, like, I don't know, Spy Ship, which no one has ever heard of, from 1942, it's like, let's just have fun.
Yeah. I mean, fans are nuts in the nicest way possible. If you get something wrong, they are very quick to let you know that you've got everything wrong, and therefore everything you've done for the last hour is useless because of one factoid being mildly incorrect. Go on.
Well, I was just gonna say, I should have put a disclaimer at the start of each episode that we're idiots. To be fair, when this is the thing, we're not like, celebrities doing a podcast or anything like that. We're not collegiates. We're not scholars of film.
Yeah.
We're just two guys who really like this genre that are exploring it with the audience. So we might get the odd bit of information wrong, and I'm happy to be told that I'm wrong. It's just fun getting it wrong sometimes.
Yes. So, Scott, are you going to somehow convince Cam to do one of the? I mean, there's spy episodes within Star Trek.
Oh,
you couldn't talk about Star Trek Picard, so maybe.
Well, I mean, there's
slip
a couple
in some Garrick episodes.
Garrick episodes, do the Gary 7 episode, Assignment Earth, is it? I think from TOS, or right, Our Man Bashir from Deep Space Nine. That's basically just a '60s Bond romp.
Yes.
Enterprise incident from the original series. Yeah.
Yes.
But there's also a Star Trek movie that has some spy connotations to it, which is Star Trek 6. It's basically a Cold War study, just changed to spaceships instead of aircraft or naval vessels.
Yeah, and I mean, we should note as well, the first interview we ever did was with Nicholas Meyer, the writer-director of Star Trek 2 and 6. So, I mean, the Star Trek kind of elements weave their way through the podcast. I don't know that we're ever going to tackle episodes of Star Trek. I think that might drive away the spy audience, but that doesn't mean we can't reference them from time to time.
Our Man Bashir, though, come on. You could pull that one off. You could pull that one off.
We did another podcast reviewing that episode, and I do feel like whenever we talk to people who work in the world of like Star Trek podcasting, they're always like, we need to get you guys on for Our Man Bashir.
Yeah.
I have no complaints. If we were to do it at some point, that would be absolutely fine. I'm sure we'd have a lot to say about it, and I'd love the opportunity to talk to Andrew Robinson or any of the people involved, any of the writers, and just doing interviews around it. But I think like we've got so many big films we've not even tackled yet, like hundreds of films we haven't even looked at yet. I think we'll think about TV down the line.
Yeah. That's actually a question I had for you is how do you go about when you kicked off with SPYHARDS and how do you go about picking the films and what order? Like, do you have years mapped out, or you just do it on a, how structured are you?
I mean, it takes geniuses to really put together the schedule that has Spy Kids 5 and Cats and Dogs 2 in the same month or so. But no,
this is really this month. This is really a month that we've done. We did that.
Yes. At the time of recording, this is November.
Yeah.
This is what they're referring to.
Lessons learned from this. But no, it's a case where Scott and I will just sit down on Zoom, and we have a master list of hundreds of titles, and we will constantly add to that list, and we'll just basically break it down. And I think generally what we try to do is have two in like kind of like a 4-movie block, 2 major movies that people know the names of instantly, one that is a total obscurity, and then one that is kind of like somewhere in the middle, something that maybe people have heard of, or maybe it's like a streaming movie that didn't get a massive amount of buzz. Like it's not something like, say, The Gray Man. It's something like, I don't know, like one of these kind of like lesser acknowledged streaming films. So
Yeah.
we'll kind of work those in there.
Cool. So when you're watching these films, I mean, I know you recently, your most recent episode was the Chris Evans, the Ghosted,
Yeah.
which I'm not gonna watch, guys. That movie, your podcast was enough. That was enough. I don't need to go there. But yeah, so what is it for you that, like, you know, that makes that you need the spy movie to have to win you over? Because there can be some fun cheesy ones, like, you know, if we use Bond as an example, like I know a lot of people love Roger Moore. I hate his era. Those movies
Oh.
just they irk the bejesus out of me, so I can't watch them. But I know a lot of people love them, but you know, they're silly and they're campy and they work for a lot of people. So what is the thing that like a spy movie needs, no matter if it's like a campy thing like that or like something serious?
Well, firstly, I want to say thank you for listening to the Ghosted episode. I'm glad that it was so bad that it put you off from watching the film. Lovely. What an endorsement. Could you put that on our Apple Podcast review? So just a little 2-star review there for us. I appreciate it. I think
No. It was not your review. You know what I mean.
I know. I'm jesting. Well, this is where I think a bit of a delineation between Cam and I comes in, because Cam has been studying films for a very long time. He's been doing podcasts for 15 years, something like that, through various iterations, talking about films. And he's got a letterbox he's had for a very long time. He's been writing notes on films he's watched since like the 90s, I think is about right.
Yeah.
Cam cares about filmmaking, and and he comes at it a lot of the time from that angle. I'm very much more of an intrinsic, how do I feel about the film? Do I feel like it's moved me? Do I feel like I've been drawn into the film? Yeah. And that's really where my passion will come from.
Yeah. I think for me, like the filmmaking is a big part of it. If I'm watching something that's just like poorly made, that'll just put me off immediately. But it is often very difficult, because when you talk about Daniel Craig's Casino Royale, is that going to make the list? Of course it is. Like, that's not even a question. But then there's other things we looked at. For example, when we're doing the 60s and you come across things like, Our Man Flint with the James Coburn spy kind of 60s stuff that's inspired by Bond. On the face of it, these movies are not made at the degree that you would hope, but historically they're important. They speak to a larger trend. So I'm always trying to balance kind of how much the filmmaking is going to influence my decision versus like, does this film matter? When we talked about Spy Kids, it was a bit of a debate for that first Spy Kids. Scott was way on board for Spy Kids, the first one, being acknowledged, making our knock list, as we call it, of the great spy films. That one really took some work for me, but I had to really like frame it in my mind as like, when I look at the kind of the arena of kid-oriented or family-oriented spy films, where does this one stand? And ultimately, it's doing it better than most. And so sometimes it's that kind of internal debate. It's not 100% one way or the other, but it's kind of like a mix of things for me. It's a blender.
Yeah. I like that. And I appreciate that approach, because, I mean, as you said, the Spy Kids is actually probably a really good example of a film that on face value would it's not one I would go to or acknowledge. But as you mentioned, like in terms of family friendly spy movies that are, kid friendly and stuff like that, it does have a place, and it does have a stamp on pop culture. So I think that can't go ignored. I suppose what's also interesting to me is like, if we kind of look at the last maybe 5 to 10 years, is there anything now other than Mission Impossible and James Bond that is making a stamp on pop culture in the way that some of these other films were doing 15, 20, 30 years ago?
Well, I would say it's spy adjacent, not necessarily 100% spy, but I would say the John Wick series is kind of wandering to that territory. And it's one of these debates that also Scott and I have on the show a lot, because we do tackle Hitman movies. We did the Mechanic, franchise, the Charles Bronson one, and then the Jason Statham. When they start to tie themselves to these globe-trotting like Hitman stories, they often are really blurring the line. And I mean, James Bond is often just an assassin for hire. So it's kind of like, sometimes it's tough to differentiate. And John Wick kind of falls into that when you're dealing with secret societies and, traversing the globe to take out, targets. So I would say like John Wick ties into that and has influenced and will influence a lot of what we see in spy action going forward. But I don't know that, like, Scott, does anything jump to mind for you in terms of like serious spy filmmaking? Because like we do, cover Le Carre and we've done, 3 Days of the Condor and all that sort of stuff. Has anything of recent years popped out as like, these are necessities?
Well, I was actually just looking at the knock list whilst you were talking and just seeing what sort of stood out in the last couple of decades that, apart from the Bonds and the Mission Impossibles and things like that. And it's actually quite surprising. There are a few in the last 2 decades. I mean, you've got Argo is one, Bridge of Spies, another, Zero Dark 30 are all films that have made the knock list. And, there's arguments to be made for all of them, and we've put them on knock because we think they're great. But they're all driven by, excellent filmmakers. So maybe that's where the other side of it is more like a prestige side of filmmaking that get interested in these sort of spy stories.
Yeah.
And even something like Tenet, which did not quite make the list. We had a great conversation about it.
Yeah.
But that is sort of a very current day filmmaker, Christopher Nolan, who's always pushing the boundaries, kind of reimagining what a spy movie can be. And that's one of the things like we found with this genre that we tackle every week is that it constantly changes and will continue to change. Like that was my concern when we started the show was I like watching a variety of films. I don't like to just be that person, for example, that sits and watch superhero movies over and over again, as much as I love them.
Yeah.
I need kind of that diversity of viewing experiences. And that was one thing the spy movie genre really gave was once we started, I never felt like I was watching the same movie over again, week after week.
Yeah, you'd notice like tropes and stuff like that would appear in multiple films, but like the way they presented them would shift, especially when you're going from, say, the 1940s to 2012. It's a very different way of telling stories.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of the fun thing about the spy genre, and I'm a big crime fiction guy, and I particularly like the hard boiled genre is my jam. And I think it kind of does a bit of the same thing that the spy genre has, is you can read or watch a number of those things, and as your tropes will come in, but there's so much variety within these subgenres that you can't really get bored with it. Which I love that. And I think it's why these movies and these books continue to be such hits for everyone, because the dexterity of these genres is quite incredible. So I got a baby screaming downstairs. So if you hear a baby wailing, that's why. So I'm curious, how are you feeling about some of the recent kind of spy and thriller movies? I know obviously you just did Ghosted. Cam, I think you mentioned The Gray Man. Basically what I'm getting at is the streaming spy movies. Are they just sort of products, or are they producing spy art, or what are your thoughts on that particular stuff at the moment?
It's a complex question, and I think it will have a complex answer, but I think that we are probably on the way out of seeing those things. You look at the reception to something like Ghosted, for instance, which has minimal reviews on review sites. It basically was dumped on Apple TV Plus with minimal fanfare. But you look at the cast, Ana de Armas, Chris Evans, they're at the height of their power, and it was just thrown there. You look at Heart of Stone, that was just sort of thrown onto Netflix with Gal Gadot. There's a few more. Citadel with the guy from Game of Thrones. Like, what happened to Citadel? No one watched that.
Yeah.
And
was it like the most expensive show or something like that as well? Wasn't it?
It's meant to have some like massive universe built for it as well, with like multiple Citadel shows in multiple countries. I don't think we're going to get much more from that. I think a lot of it is not driven by a creative idea. It's just driven by a need for content, and that will usually give you negative results.
Or The Gray Man. And The Gray Man had a lot more buzz surrounding it than Heart of Stone or Ghosted did. But after it came out, did you hear many people talking about it? No. I mean, there was even interviews with the filmmakers saying like they kind of regarded it as like corporate content. Like they didn't
Yeah.
you know, they saw it as like, well, this is a business decision and Netflix wants this material. So we made it for them. And you're like, okay, like that's not great, because the whole hope with streaming was that it would open it up to filmmakers kind of having something of blank checks to do whatever they wanted. And you sometimes
Yeah.
get that. You
Yeah.
know, look at Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon through Apple.
Mm.
You know, that's a $200 million movie that Apple was like, you go nuts. And we got a
Yeah.
few movies like that. You know, I think of Roma. There's been a number, The Irishman, but we also get a lot of stuff like this. And
Yeah.
it's very clear that like it may get eyeballs. I mean, I'm not someone who has inside knowledge on the you know, the data that Netflix and Apple and Amazon and all that are collecting, but it doesn't seem to have buzz. You don't seem to see people excited about it or writing about it or posting stories about it. And so I don't know that that really benefits them in terms of like paying these huge, you know, these huge budgets for these movies. So that's kind of the problem. And I think, you know, you're always just, you know, one step away from someone making a great one that everyone gets excited about and suddenly reinvigorates that sort of appetite on the streaming networks. But the way they're cutting budgets on these things now with the streaming networks, where they're cutting content out and they don't want to invest in major projects like this, I think, as Scott said, those days are running out. And I don't think they've made, I don't think they've built a great argument as to why it should continue, because we tackle these movies and a lot of them are very bland filler.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel like, in general, then, is there a when you're watching maybe older films, are you finding the kind of, not necessarily looking back with nostalgic eyes, but are you finding that they were a bit more daring back in the day versus like the last like maybe like 15 years? I think for me, the last like 15 years, I've not really been blown away by much outside of a few Bonds and Mission Impossible and a couple others here and there that you mentioned earlier.
I think it depends how far back you want to go. If we're talking just sort of 15, 20 years, you're going back to the beginning of the Bourne films at that point. And that revolutionized, that was the last big wave to change spy movies. When Bourne Identity came around, who were we talking to about the Bourne Identity recently?
Oh, don't ask me that.
It was Lee Tamahori, the director of Die Another Day, who was on our show last year in December.
That's right.
Check that out. Great interview. And he was talking about going to watch the Bourne Identity whilst they were shooting Die Another Day. And him turning to Barbara Broccoli and saying, like, we're in trouble here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they had to pivot because that film is night and day, which is another spy film, compared to Bourne Identity.
Yeah, it's true. As the stars align, this week is the anniversary of I think both Quantum of Solace and Casino Royale. I think they both had an anniversary this week, and ended up watching both of them yesterday because I had nothing to do, which was great. And I obviously Casino Royale. We all know that that's heavily influenced by Bourne, you know, massively. Quantum of Solace, it's almost like, I don't know, they did that film, it imitated Bourne, but to like a sickening degree, I felt like rewatching it this time, particularly in the cinematography, like more so than Casino. That film is so shaky. I was like, I had like sea legs by the time the thing finished because it was just moving so much. But yeah, that's a have you guys done? I can't remember. Have you done Quantum yet?
Yes, we have. And we did interview the cinematographer of the film as well and talked about that. It's not so much that it's shaky cam, it's editing with that one. Yeah, like they've cut it to shreds in the, you know, editing room to make this action try to feel propulsive. Yeah. And, you know, Quantum is an amazing looking film, but I think the thing with Casino Royale was the Bond series has always been famous for jumping on trends. Like, almost from day one. The second movie out of the gate with Bond, From Russia with Love, is just ripping off Hitchcock's North by Northwest all over the place in the 39 Steps. So, like, very common. But I think the one thing Bond has always managed to do is have its own identity as a Bond film, but let those flavors kind of work their way in. And, like, you look at the Bourne franchise, and you can see those elements in Casino Royale. But when you get to Quantum, they override it. They're just like, make a Bourne clone. And that's something that doesn't work very well. You know, you can look at their next film, Skyfall. There's Dark Knight stuff all over that movie. But it doesn't feel like you're watching The Dark Knight 100%.
No, it feels like you're watching Home Alone.
or Straw Dogs. Either one.
Are you in the pro camp of the Home Alone ending or the or anti?
I think Cam and I are split on this one, if I remember our Skyfall review correctly. I think I know I'm pro. I enjoy it.
I like the idea. I find with repeat viewings, it just doesn't excite me at all to watch it.
Yeah. I'm like right in the middle of you because I like it, but I also agree that when I'm watching the movie, once he leaves London and they go out to Scotland, I'm sort of like, oh, I got to get through this bit now.
Yeah.
It has that weird sort of vibe. Whereas I don't hate it. I think it looks great and the action's fun, all that kind of stuff. But there is a bit of like, maybe they could have maybe cut that down. Maybe I don't know, trimmed it.
Would you have enjoyed it more if Silver had been hit in the head with paint tins?
No, I think it needed to be an iron just coming down and smacking him in the face.
Bond is throwing bricks off the roof at Silver. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Maybe if he slipped on some oil and stepped on a nail.
Yeah.
Barefoot.
Perfect. And then got electrocuted and you saw his skeleton. Great.
Yes. Yes. Perfect. So, okay, I'm interested in kind of like to kind of pivot and chat a bit about kind of more about 007 and Mission Impossible because it's been an interesting couple of years for those particular franchises. And I'm curious.
Boy has it.
Say again.
Yeah. I said, boy has it.
Yes. So let's because we're talking Bond. Let's kind of start with a little bit of Bond stuff. In general, what's your take on the Craig era? Saying that having just watched his first two films, I think I've kind of and with his most recent one, I've sort of rethought, what I view of his sort of era. But I'm curious about your opinion first.
Take us away, Cam.
Okay. I think there's no Bond actor with a flawless run. Let's get that said right up front. Connery, who's considered the iconic favorite by many, had Diamonds Are Forever, and in my opinion, You Only Live Twice is not particularly up to the rest of them. And then also Never Say Never Again. Never Say Never Again also was not the best way to go out either. So it's not a perfect run. And I think the thing with Craig is his highs are so high that is ultimately what matters. Because both Skyfall and Casino Royale are going to continue on as two of the greatest Bond films that have ever been made.
Yeah.
Now, there was also the issue that Craig and his era fell within the period where shared universes became a big thing at the multiplex, and so you get kind of the messiness of something like Spectre trying to tie it all together. I think the series goes out on a high. I actually really like No Time to Die. But it's a bumpy 5-movie run, but it's ultimately successful in keeping the character alive and well with audiences. People loved Daniel Craig, and it elevated, I think, the filmmaking craft of the movies in many ways. The Craig movies look astonishing, almost to a T, almost right across the line, with the exception of maybe the yellow cinematography of Spectre.
I don't think I have much to add to that in the sense. I think for me, it's really a case of the Craig era gave us some of the best films that have come out of the James Bond factory. As a film itself, I think Casino Royale transcends, it's a Bond film, to just being a great film that anyone could enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think Skyfall is pretty close to that. And I think as a piece of work, it's a really interesting 5-film series. And I agree with Cam. I think No Time to Die was a fine way of sending him off. I have no problem with him being blown up, which I'm sure we'll chat about in a minute. But it doesn't mean it's something I would necessarily reach for.
Yeah.
I think I would still probably stick on the Pierce Brosnan film or a Sean Connery film before I stuck on anything from the Daniel Craig films.
Yeah, I feel that way as well. And that I love the Daniel Craig era for what it is, but one of my favorite things about Bond films is how rewatchable they are. And I mean, I have watched the Roger Moores, the Connerys, the Daltons a billion times. And it's very rare I sit down and I'm like, you know what? I got to throw on Spectre, or I want to throw on No Time to Die. These movies are very long.
Yes.
I would like to get back to maybe Bond being more fun. Because like I
Yes.
think Casino Royale is I think the lighter one. Like that's the one that's the most I think rewatchable in that sense.
Yep.
But it's a 2.5 hour film, and it has a lot of like kind of heavier drama to it. I would like to get back to kind of balancing out more of the fun elements in Bond.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with that. I do miss lighthearted Bond, and I know they sort of, I think they kind of attempted it a little bit with Craig in his last two films. He tries to be a little bit more jokey, but but the general vibe of those films are so heavy that it's hard for that to cut through. And I think part of that's also just like even down to the music in ways like the themes. I don't really like the theme for Spectre or particularly No Time to Die. I don't. Do you guys ever listen to Weird Al?
I used to not
Okay.
his more recent work, but Alapalooza, I was all over it.
Okay. Do you remember way back in the 90s when he parodied Nirvana, and he has that line where it's hard to sing with all these marbles in my mouth.
Yeah.
That to me is No Time to Die. That her Billie Eilish's song. I was just like, can you like pronounce words clearly, please? Like you're mumbling this whole time, and it drove me nuts. And I think that also just like it's funny to me because like I'm a big music guy as well, and music has a real influence on how I'm going to enjoy something. I think, and I think that also helped, not helped, but that kind of hindered a little bit of my enjoyment of just simply going into No Time to Die, being like, I don't even like this song. I'm not even excited about this big Bond song. And normally they're all sort of quite fun, even if they're ludicrous Madonna songs. They're still like kind of fun. But yeah, but kind of back to No Time to Die then. So with the death of Bond, you're both cool with it, which is interesting because I know obviously that was the big controversy with that movie. What does Bond's death signify for you guys and for the franchise?
I'd say they're probably two different answers. I think Cam and I are very happy to make our peace with the fact that is Daniel Craig's Bond dying. I don't think that implies that Pierce Brosnan, Timothy Dalton, George Lazenby, Sean Connery or Roger Moore's Bonds are also dead.
Or David Niven.
Or David Niven, or Peter Sellers, or anyone else who appeared in Casino Royale 67, who are all James
Barry
Bond.
Nelson.
Yeah, Barry Nelson. He's still going out there somewhere, apparently. No, so I don't think that implies that it's like the end for anyone else. So I don't think it diminishes any of their films. Some people seem to have taken Bond's death as this sort of like giant FU to a 27 film continuity, where I don't see it as that. I just see it as like a closed loop of 5 films. And I'm glad that he is the only Bond actor that got to see it through to the end. He actually got to have a proper exit, whereas the rest of them never got that opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, to me, if you look at The Dark Knight Rises, where Batman blows up, the Batcopter or whatever he called it. I think he's called it the Bat, and takes off to Italy with Catwoman.
Yeah,
that now influences how I watch, Michael Keaton's Batman. It's like, no, like these Craigs made a very clear point of, we are doing this kind of closed circle mythology. We are starting things over. We have Spectre being introduced, and Blofeld is his brother. Like, that is not something that ties into in any way what you're watching on Her Majesty's Secret Service. So
no.
I don't have a problem with it. If they want to tell this kind of very closed 5-film story, sure, go nuts. And they said, and I've said this before on the podcast, in the first movie, Bond says, I believe 007s or 00s have a very short life expectancy.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like tying the bow finally on the journey of that character. And let's be honest, this Bond, who we spent those 5 films with, is not a man who's going to live a long life.
No.
He's drinking with a scorpion. He's taking risks, that man. He runs through too many walls. He's getting CTE from all this this wall running he's doing. But then I will pivot to the other part of your question, is like the sort of the fan reaction, as it were, or the general reaction to it. We've been challenged online on social media by other people for not having a more of a severe stance against Bond's death. Why are we not more angry about it? Why are we supportive of the choice? And I think for us both, we just explain why we're supportive of the choice. But one thing I do understand is the different perspective, because someone said to me a few months ago, just pretend they'd killed Picard. Now, to say spy films in Star Trek are like
they did.
Well,
they did. Scott.
I'm going to get to. Did Picard season 1 and 2 count? I'm not sure they do.
We're getting Robo Bond in the next
next
movie.
Well, that's the nanobots, right? It's the smart blood. That's it. It all connects. And that's the thing. Like I was quite miffed when they killed Picard in season 1 of Picard, but like at the same time, I just have erased it from my head, and it doesn't affect TNG or the movies for me. It's just what that show made a choice to do, and that's absolutely fine. But I can understand, like, if that's someone you've been following James Bond since your childhood, and he is your idol, and you dress like him, and you've got like you got trinkets around your house and things like that for Bond, and then they just killed him. Yeah, I can understand why you might take that slightly personally. But this is where we try to step in and be like, okay, but here's an objective view as to why it's not personal.
Yeah. I think it, like, in one level, like I agree, like it could have worked. I think for me, my biggest problem with No Time to Die was the film itself, the story. I didn't care about anyone at all. I kind of felt him visiting Vesper's grave just felt forced. But I think I would say I think that it was also a bit forced in Spectre, trying to connect all the villains had to be Spectre villains suddenly, and it's like they didn't need to be. And I also, when I remember watching Spectre, and when he is introduced to what's the blonde lady's name? White.
Madeline?
No, Madeline. That's Madeline Swan. That's it. I was really excited at first. I was like, oh my god, she's gonna be like a protege, and then they instantly turned it into a love interest. And then, but I never bought the love interest. I never bought the chemistry between them. So when this whole, No Time to Die is kind of pivoting on their whole, amazing romance and love story, I'm like, I'm not buying this, guys. So I felt like, for Bond to sacrifice himself for people that I don't care about, characters I don't care about, made it a really complicated film for me. It's one that I probably won't watch again. It's probably in the camp with the Roger Moores. I'm like, those will be the ones that I don't revisit. I don't know.
You're hurting Cam with this.
I'm sorry.
I'm more with you. I would say there, Luke. I'm not a big Roger Moore guy. I was a Pierce Brosnan baby.
Yeah. I love Pierce Brosnan's great. I love Connery. I love Dalton. Those are my go-tos. When I go back. You mentioned something earlier about the sort of continuity of James Bond. Where do you guys sit with this franchise? Some people are like, oh, it's all one big universe, and each the James Bond is a code name. Like, I hate that crap. It is for me, every Bond is its own universe, with Lazenby being the exception, because it's kind of tied in.
Yeah, I mean, I always just look at it as it's very messy, and I'm happy to live in a world where it's just episodic storytelling. And if things don't line up 100%, who cares? And the way that franchises are exploited nowadays, you're getting like bad entries and all this kind of stuff. And frankly, as fans, you might as well just start picking and choosing the way Scott was doing with Picard, because a lot of it is bad. I'm wearing a shirt right now, Star Wars, but like I was a huge Star Wars kid, and like you're expecting me to watch like Rise of Skywalker and take that seriously anymore? It's like, no, I just go, okay, well, I guess I won't watch that movie again. I'll have my, I'll kind of have pick and choose the movies that I care about. And that's kind of the way these things go. And Bond's been going since 1962. I think it is entirely sane for Bond fans to kind of pick the ones they like. And you know what? If they don't like where No Time to Die went, whatever. You're getting another one in, probably 2 or 3 years at this point.
I do love a theory I read years ago. It's not necessarily what I subscribe to. I'm more close to just Cam's chaos theory, which I think is more just like it is what it is. There's just films, watch them, enjoy. That's pretty much the easy way of doing it. And that's the Moneypenny theory. So every change of Moneypenny is a new continuity of Bond. Now, there are some errors there. For instance, Die Another Day would throw that out because there's all references to Rosa Klebb and stuff like that because it's the 20th film, yada, yada, yada. But like, if you do it by the money pennies, so Roger Moore and Lazenby and Sean Connery are all one Bond. Mm-hmm. And you've got the Timothy Dalton era has 2 with Carolyn Bliss. And then you've got 4 with Samantha Bond with Pierce Brosnan. And then you've got 5 a couple without, but then you've got Eve Moneypenny from Skyfall onwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of works.
It's kind of fun, but then it's also like, I don't know, when you have Trevelyan and Goldeneye talking about like the women that Bond has lost, who have been killed, it's like we immediately are thinking of, like On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And so it's like there's always that kind of franchise weight of it all, but I think happier in a world where we didn't care and like the producers and storytellers didn't really care. They treated it more as like almost, like comic books, which would be rebooted all the time back in the day.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
I think that's probably the future, if that's something you're going to drift us onto, is in terms of what Bond is. So I'll let you do it because it's probably where we're going. So go for it.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, that's where we're going next. Is what's the future then with Bond? Where do you want to see this franchise go post No Time to Die? And
well, I just got off the phone with Barbara Broccoli about an hour ago.
As you do.
She says she's more interested in selling some Scotch whiskey and overpriced shirts for the next couple of years before they announce a Bond film. Now,
to be fair, Scott, we should note too, you were calling to try to get on Road to a Million season 2. That's why you were calling her.
Of course.
that hit show.
I haven't watched it. I have to say, I'm not sure I will. I know Cam's a big fan.
Big fan. I've watched the first 4 episodes because I'm going to review it on our Patreon show.
He is. I'll specify. I'm not tainting myself with it. The future.
Yeah.
What I'd like to put. I suppose I can't say what is necessarily going to happen. I have a feeling what's going to happen is it will be somewhere in between Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig, and it will be set in the modern era. That's what I think will probably happen. What I'd like to happen, and I'll throw to Cam to put his 2 cents in afterwards, is I think it should go back and be a period piece. I think you should set it in the 1960s, have it make sense, because the last 10 Bond films have to keep jumping through this hoop of why is Bond relevant in the 21st century or the 1990s?
Yes, it's true.
And because spying has moved on.
Yeah.
We don't need the guy who goes to, Marrakesh and shags around a bit. We don't have that guy in the field anymore. It doesn't exist. So you remove that question, you send him back to when he was relevant, and he can be driving a DB5 and it would make sense. And he can do all that stuff. That's what I would do. And also I would probably remove the continuity, but that's me.
Yeah, the thing about the period piece that gives me pause is that every fan wants it. And so when it becomes the popular, that's what they should be doing, that means it's not going to happen. Yeah. Because I'd like to think if you're hiring good screenwriters, they have a bigger imagination than the average fan on the internet.
Thanks,
and so you're welcome. And so they are going to have something that they're going to go, we have something more interesting that not every person thinks about, because that is the most popular theory, is the period piece thing now to talk about with Bond. I mean, not saying they won't do it, but it feels like it's almost too obvious.
Yeah.
I think for me, what I'd like to see is just move away from the seriousness of Craig. I think that's big. Bring in more of the humor, make them more fun. They don't have to be silly. We don't have to go back to Roger Moore era kind of camp, but I think we're kind of moving past this kind of super, super serious era that spawned the Craig era. That was the Nolan Batman trilogy. And there were so many things around that time that were trying to be very serious. Yeah. And I think we're going to move a little bit past that. It's more about, I think, what they're going to have to examine internally. And this is true for pretty much every Bond era, is what does this next generation of fans want? Yeah. And, the Brosnan era clicked with, my generation as well as Scott's, because, you had Brosnan was very appealing, but you also had things like the GoldenEye video game, things like that really pulled them in. And it's kind of like that with every era. Daniel Craig was hugely popular because he fell at the right time and was what people wanted, coming off of things like Jason Bourne. So they've got to figure out, what do people want from Bond right now? And I don't know, because when I look at the box office, especially this year, and I see, the biggest hits are Barbie, Mario Brothers, the Five Nights at Freddy's was a massive opener. It's very clear there's a young generation out there that is making their voices heard in the marketplace. I have no idea what they want. I'm too old to determine that.
I mean, in terms of trying to find out what they want, I mean, the trend that I feel like I've noticed this year is that everything that's been a what I would consider a proper hit has been something that's been closer to original than sequel or the next thing in the next comic book phase of whatever universe they're in about, except for the Spider-Man movie, I guess. The Into the Cross the Spider-Verse, like that's kind of, but that's I kind of like it's kind of adjacent to the MCU. It doesn't really count. It has its own sort of,
It
you
feels
know.
very bold. Like it's
Yeah.
not kind of playing within the established parameters of a Spider-Man movie the way that, for example, the Amazing Spider-Man movies did, or the Spider-Man Homecoming,
Yeah.
trilogy.
Yeah, definitely. And I like one of the films that I loved this year was the new Ninja Turtle movie. Like I didn't realize that I was going to like fall in love with that movie. That was, it was one of the, for me, it's one of the most fun, best movies, kids movies of the year. I'm like, this is what people are responding to, because this is one of those few things that was reboot, remake, whatever you want to call Mutant Mayhem, of a property that's already been, had multiple films within the recent past, but somehow managed to spark originality and have a good heart and soul to it. And I just also think people are bored with comic book movies in general. But also this leads me to my next point, and is Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible falls into that camp of, it just felt tired, and I was excited. I wanted to love Dead Reckoning. I loved Fallout. I'm a big Mission Impossible. I love those movies. And I went in watching this, and I just was the whole time I was watching, I was like, what happened? What happened between Fallout and this? What is going on? So I'm curious on your guys' take on what sort of happened with Fallout and like them now renaming Part 2 and all that kind of stuff, which feels like a desperate attempt to kind of make people forget that Dead Reckoning is part of a 2-part, double hitter. What are your thoughts on Mission Impossible?
Well, I think for me, at least, anyway, we've only done a brief episode on Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. We've not really explored it too much, but we'll talk about it. I think we need to peel back a little bit and just look at what happened this year, because you mentioned, Cam says things like Barbie and Five Nights at Freddy's Super Mario.
Yeah.
And then you got this, what people are calling franchise fatigue, which is a phrase I've heard many times, going back to 2004, 2005, when it comes to Star Trek, funnily enough. But, you've got Indiana Jones. You've got Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. The other thing, apart from people being franchise fatigued, is those films weren't good.
Yes.
They weren't fun. They were missing a lot of elements. They were mid-level films. Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1 has some great stunts, don't get me wrong. Tom Cruise is putting his body on the line again. I'd love him doing it.
Yeah.
But it's missing a lot of the fun that Fallout had. Indiana Jones is just... I mean, there's fun elements in that film. Again, there's fun stuff, but you've got this sad old Indiana Jones with Phoebe Waller-Bridge running around him in circles like a excitable puppy.
And bad CG, just wall-to-wall bad effects. And it looks chintzy. Yeah.
It's just, I think there's also an element that people are forgetting in this discussion, that the cream rises to the top.
Mm-hmm.
Barbie is a great film, and it looks great, and it's fun. Oppenheimer, which we hadn't mentioned, is a great film, and it's long, but it's great. It's well done.
Yeah.
Super Mario Bros. Was a good film. I enjoyed it. Five Nights at Freddy's, I don't know. I haven't seen it. I don't really play the game. I haven't got any stakes in this game. But going back,
we're too old, Scott. We're too old.
Yeah, I've only got 2 Nights at Freddy's. I'm not quite there yet.
I can't even make it through one night.
Oh. But Mission Impossible, like I feel like they have locked down on the wrong things from Fallout. They've learned the wrong lessons. I listened to an interview with Christopher McQuarrie years ago now, when Fallout came out. And he said the way they design these films, and I'm assuming this is the same process now, is they come up with the stunts, they come up with the moments, and then they connect them together with plot.
Right.
That, for me, just feels like the wrong way of making a story. You haven't got a story. You're just making something up that connects dots together.
It worked for Fallout, though.
Yeah, I guess that's... I guess you can
Fallout
throw that.
Maybe is lucky, though.
But you could argue that with probably Rogue Nation as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I just don't know what... The stunts are great. I just felt like it was a bit flat everywhere else. There was these massive exposition dumps in Mission Impossible Fallout Part 1. I'm not going to keep saying the full title of that film, because it's going to
Dead Reckoning Part 1.
Oh yeah, that's it.
Oh yeah,
Dead
you
Reckoning
said
Part
Fallout.
1.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Fallout Part 1. No thanks. Dead Reckoning Part 1 or Dead Reckoning now, I guess. There's no Part 1 anymore. Yeah, it's changed. I just felt like it, apart from the stunts, there just wasn't anything there.
No.
I actually really enjoyed Dead Reckoning a lot. I think in terms of action direction, it's among the best of the year. And so, like, when I'm looking at set pieces, I just found it thrilling. But I agree in terms of, like, there's those exposition dumps that are like, Mission Impossible movies have always been kind of heavy with those. Maybe less so when you get to kind of especially like the De Palma one is so well directed. But
yeah.
like the fact you have that scene off the top of Dead Reckoning Part 1 where it's like the group of guys exchanging dialogue and they're finishing each other's sentences. It's like this feels like a parody of exposition scenes, and maybe it was, I don't know.
Yep.
But I think the two biggest problems this movie had, I don't even think it's that it didn't entertain, because I think, you look at reviews for it, you look at audience scores, they're pretty good, pretty darn good. I think it had a couple problems. I think it was too long. I think the idea that you would make a close to 3-hour Mission Impossible movie, people will take that from Batman because that character has just massive weight within the world of pop culture.
Yeah.
Mission Impossible doesn't. They've never been massive grossing movies. They've been successful. They've been big hits, but they have not been these just juggernaut franchise movies. And so I think they were very presumptuous that people would be so invested they would show up for a 3-hour Mission Impossible that is labeled Part 1. And I don't think they have that loyal audience in the numbers they thought they had. And they were expecting crossover from Top Gun. That's completely different. Like, the idea of a Top Gun sequel it's never happened. And so it had a novelty to it. They had a young cast. They had, just something they were promoting that felt different to people. And they had word of mouth of people saying, you need to see this in theaters because it is unbelievable.
Yep.
As much as I enjoyed Dead Reckoning, I don't know that I would be running around to everyone being like, you need to see this in the best theater possible, because it didn't feel drastically different than the last few Mission Impossibles, really. No. And so, like, what is the appeal there? I think they just ran into a lot of problems. And then, of course, in terms of, if you're just going to look at numbers, having Oppenheimer and Barbie open like a week later just killed them.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. It's kind of further your point. In terms of kind of the narrative and feeling like the previous Mission Impossible movies, that was one of the big things that was driving me nuts. Is I was like, we've already seen Ethan Hunt in a sandstorm. We've already seen Ethan Hunt on top of trains. We've already seen him climb. We've seen all of the action pieces. We've already seen, and I was like, what is this movie what is Dead Reckoning bringing to the Mission Impossible table that is fresh? And I can't really think of anything. And I do agree in terms of the length. It is way too long. I watched it in cinema, and I'm a completist on certain things, so I did get the 4K when it came out and watched it with my wife, because she didn't go to the cinema to see it with me, so she happy to watch it at home. She was bored stiff, and she loves these, like, she's not like a massive film nerd or whatever, but she likes the Mission Impossible movies. She was really bored the whole time, and just kept saying things like, why is this action sequence still going on? Like, and how many times does Haley Atwell's Grace have to be captured and get away? Like, they did it like 3 to 4 times in the span of like 20 minutes. And it just felt like, was there no editing? Was there no one looking at what is going on? Do you think then that the fallout of Dead Reckoning?
Yes.
We're done, everyone. That's a wrap.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you feel there's going to be, it's going to hurt part 2? That's now not part 2.
Yes. The fact that they're going to rebrand it as more of a standalone, my suspicion is at this point they're just going to try to get by. Like, I don't think at this point internally that they are expecting the next Mission Impossible to be, Skyfall levels of popular. I think it's more like, can we get this thing to maybe a little bit more money than Dead Reckoning Part 1? But I think the curtain is closing on the Tom Cruise era of Mission Impossible. I think we need to acknowledge as well that, we're talking about like younger generations of moviegoers showing up at the Cineplex, and Scott cited Indiana Jones. I don't know. When you were 20, did you want to go to movies about like 60 and 80-year-olds being action heroes? I don't think I did.
No, I mean we did watch Star Trek: First Contact.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Did we want to see Patrick Stewart as an action hero? I'm not sure I did.
Probably not.
No,
right?
no, that was a joke. Obviously, but actually, it is an interesting point because if you think if you use Star Trek as a comparison, the TOS films, they're a bunch of old farts in those movies, but they're great. I'm gonna watch Undiscovered Country any day. Like that's and they're clearly past their prime and puffy and stuff, but the film's great. So I think it can be done.
Those movies also didn't have to make as much money as a Mission Impossible has to make to
That's true.
justify itself.
And they were like all less than 2 hours, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. They knew what they were doing. Do you think that this part 2, not part 2, will they just eradicate Gabriel? Just because I mean, what a void of a villain he was.
I don't think they'll. I don't think they'll change what they've planned to do story-wise. I think it'll end up being the same film they were going to do either way, even with just changing the name. I think that's more of a branding thing. Because I think you also look at the other issue this year has had about part ones with Fast X Part 1 and Spider-Verse Part 1 or whatever it is.
Where they dropped the Part 1 because Fast X was just Fast X, and then it was going to be Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, and then they changed it. So the next one is going to be called Beyond the Spider-Verse.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that's more of a marketing and branding thing to try and get people to think like, oh, I haven't got to watch Dead Reckoning to watch this. I can just go in fresh, even though you probably will need to watch Dead Reckoning. But I imagine the opening crawl will be like a catch up, like a Star Wars text, wall of text,
Yeah,
Palpatine has returned. The AI has the entity has returned.
The entity has returned. Yeah, instead of the nice like sizzle, you're just gonna get like the Star Wars crawl, but with Mission Impossible theme going on. Yeah.
The thing is, like, we pay attention to this. We are following what's going on with the next Mission Impossible. The average person is not.
I know,
and especially in like a year and a half or whenever it comes out, because it's been pushed. I can't remember the exact release date, but like by the time that movie comes out, I think they are just more trying to trick people into showing up. Yeah, that's it.
I was thinking that. I think it's pushed to 2025, I think.
Yeah.
I might be wrong, but that seems right. But yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, people aren't even going to remember Dead Reckoning by the time that comes out, which
also no one saw it.
Also, no one saw it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it'll be popular on streaming and everything by the time the new one comes out. But if you ask the average person on the street, what was the plot of, I don't know, Rogue Nation? You are going to get the blankest of stares. I think like the investment in Mission Impossible storytelling is far lower than the studio and I guess Tom Cruise and the various, Macquarie and all the people involved thought it was. Like, I think they genuinely thought people are like gripped by the narrative of these movies, and that's just not the case.
No,
I'm sitting here sweating now, trying to think if I know the plot to Ghost Protocol or Rogue Nation. I'm not sure I could tell you.
Right?
I couldn't tell you Ghost Protocol, but Rogue Nation is when a whole IMF gets disavowed after the Kremlin gets blown up, and Ethan has to save the day from that guy with the brief. Wait, I might be confusing the two now.
You are doing Ghost Protocol.
I know
Ghost Protocol pretty well.
Shit. Well, but Rogue Nation is that the one where the Kremlin blows up, right? That's at least right.
That's Ghost Nation.
Is it? Shit.
Yeah, Rogue Nation is the one with Solomon Lane where he first shows up as
like the disciples or something, isn't it? Like his anti-IMF.
I think they started in Fallout.
The Syndicate. They're the Syndicate comes in with Rogue Nation, right?
I don't remember. Did the Syndicate start in Fallout? I can't.
No. They were continued into Fallout because the guy whatever the film is where he is in the record shop and it's like the Syndicate. That's.
Okay, that's the start of Rogue Nation. But the point is, like, I have seen Fallout, I think, like 4 or 5 times. I have seen Rogue Nation, I think, 3 or 4 times. Yeah. The fact that, like, the plots are muddy in my mind tells me that, like, that's not the appeal of these movies.
Yeah. I agree. So we'll wrap up with this one final question about Mission Impossible then. Where do you, because it feels like, as you were saying, the curtains are closing with Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible era, and I am all for that. Even though after watching, after he watched Indiana Jones 20, he was like, I'm gonna keep going forever. I seriously hope he doesn't. But where would you like to see this franchise go next? Similar to what we're talking about with Bond. Like, what would you, how would you want it reinvented post Tom Cruise?
I don't know how you do it without putting a big name at the top. My instinct initially was say to make a TV show, but I don't think they make TV shows like Mission Impossible anymore. I think the budgets just aren't there to change sets every week and change casts and stuff. It's just not. It's
the
just
level
not
of stunts.
possible. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not possible. Well, yeah, what we've come to expect from Mission. I think you take a break.
Definitely.
You take a 5-year break. You re-release them on 4K or something like that, some sort of combined set, and do some press. Get people thinking about the nostalgia for a little while. Go silent, Ghost, and then come back with whoever is a big lead at the time. And this is. I mean, Henry Cavill's been played already, but like Tom Cruise was a known entity in 1996 when they cast him in this one. He was one of the biggest movie stars then. He still is now. So you find someone in 2030 or 2028 or whenever we're talking about who is at Tom Cruise level, and you make him the lead or her the lead, and that's who that's your anchor for the next 4 films, and you just start again. If you want, you can have Tom Cruise in to be like the head of the IMF, like handing over to a new team, giving out the mission maybe, so keep some continuity. But also, I would be totally fine if you just started again.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is, because I would almost be like, you know what? Once Tom Cruise is done, just seal it up. But that'll never happen. That's of course, they're going to want to exploit that at some point again. I think the problem is that they have established these movies are their lead actor doing stunt work that is like the greatest in the world. They've become like, Jackie Chan films, basically, where it's like you are going to watch Tom Cruise achieve something that mere mortals like ourselves cannot. And I don't know how many actors are up to that or have the power, because the thing is, Tom Cruise is a producer on these movies. He has so much clout in being able to put himself in these situations. If you were to fire him or have him walk away or whatever after the next one, and have, say, Chris Hemsworth jump in, he can't do that stuff. Like, he's not going to be allowed to do that stuff. And so I think they have a real problem in terms of like creating Mission Impossible movies in the future that can deliver on the expectations fans will have because of these movies.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to have to be like a radical reimagining. Like, I don't think they can fall into the same template as these movies. I think it's going to have to be an entirely different take, the way that Nolan's Batman was to the Tim Burton Batmans. It's got to be something 100% different. And I just don't know what that is. I mean, it's up to someone far smarter than me to figure that out.
Yeah.
And
I've got it.
Uh-oh. Well, I said smarter than me, Scott.
You finally make the Mission Impossible. Just saying. After 8, like, you have him fail at the end. It's actually impossible. Everyone would be so mad, but like I would be entertained by the sheer like gumption it took to do it.
They show up, look around, and go, no.
Nah.
And just turn
Can't
and
do
walk
it.
away.
It gets the mission. He's like, no, I don't choose to accept it. Throws it over his shoulder and just walks out.
Yeah.
One thing I could suggest, and this is like a smaller thing, not about part of the larger storytelling of the movie, but like the TV show, which, I mean, I've only watched a couple episodes. I'm not a big TV guy, but I've seen a couple. Big on the ensemble, and it's very ensemble driven. So I would say like that's one way to shake it up, is to go back to the basics, which is make it an ensemble driven franchise. But you're going to have to obviously come up with ways to deliver the big budget experience people want in a way that can kind of sidestep the Tom Cruise expectations.
Yeah, I think it's possible. It's not impossible. But I think you've kind of hit on it, and that's kind of where my thinking with Mission Impossible has been for a while. And that is, I loved, again, your Mission Impossible review, so everyone go listen to that as well. But you because you didn't grow up watching the show or have a lot of affection for it, the Mr. Phelps thing didn't bother you.
Yeah,
which I totally get, because at the time when I was a kid, I knew who Phelps was, but I kind of view the show and these movies as separate. I don't view them like as the same continuity. But I'm always like, go back to Mr. Phelps, go back to the ensemble, like just go back to Mission Impossible, and just make smart spy thrillers that because I think you're right. You're gonna have to sidestep the big crazy action. and do the Nolan thing, do the Casino Royale thing, where it's like, okay, we're gonna have to make this smart. It can't be big action. It's got to be smart spy stuff now, to kind of win people over in a different way. I would love to see that personally, but who knows what'll happen. I think it'll probably be the Tom Cruise is in charge of the IMF dealing out missions and coming in to save the day with his his walker.
Well, you know what? You say that, but like with Top Gun Maverick, a lot of the way that they put those young actors into, I don't want to say dangerous situations, but situations that most actors don't have to deal with.
Zone. They put them into the danger zone.
Yeah, they had those, those young actors up in those planes, hurling out their guts into bags, basically. And why were they able to do that? Because Tom Cruise is a producer on the movie.
Yes.
And he can oversee the production. So if you do have him, hang out as like the leader of the IMF or something at the age of 70, he can somewhat push through,
it's true,
doing these larger stunts with the right actors and, the younger actors who can do this stuff. So that might be a necessity to maintaining that level of blockbuster kind of thrills.
And by having him on like the poster still, the people who are underneath him don't have to be as big as Tom Cruise. So you can then cast, 5 or 6 people, names that people know, but aren't necessarily like Hollywood leads. And they can form your new IMF team for the next film or two. You look at like the Oceans films. They're not stunt spectaculars, but they have a great ensemble. Yeah. And it's all about, it's a heist, which a lot of these mission films are just heist films, basically. Yes. So you get a good team of people who have great rapport, you might have a good film on your hands.
I just had a thought run through my head because Ethan Hunt goes rogue in every single movie. I just figured as Ethan, as head of the IMF, it's gonna be the agents. Oh God, the head of the IMF has gone rogue again. We gotta go find him and tame him and bring him back to the office and set him back down because he won't stop going rogue.
Maybe they should make IMF cool again. Maybe that should be their mission, because the thing is, like, yes, Ethan Hunt and his team are cool, but they're always butting up against what the IMF is doing. So like maybe let's get back to making IMF actually a cool agency people would want to work for.
Yes, and I think the first 2 films kept it that way, and then once 3 hits, it just kind of goes off to, it needs to be the Ethan Hunt show more than, I mean, number 2, well, they're all the Ethan Hunt show, but you know what I mean.
Even the first one though, the second like that mission goes wrong, he has all of his superiors turning on him, and Henry Czerny like trying to like basically arrest him. So it's like, I don't know, maybe like we need to get back to like a really, really cool IMF where you're like, this is like kind of that wish fulfillment or fantasy kind of organization to work for.
Yeah, I totally agree. Right, we should probably wrap this up, guys. I had a lot of fun chatting with you about your journey to SPYHARDS, talking James Bond, talking Mission Impossible. Where can people find you on the interwebs, if they so choose?
Well, we are terrible at being spies because you can find us everywhere. Literally everywhere. We have every lockdown. We have every domain, every @ as SPYHARDS, SPYHARDS. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok, we're there. And anywhere you're listening to podcasts, even here on YouTube, if you're watching it on the video, you can just search for SPYHARDS and watch us that way.
Cool. So everyone go check out SPYHARDS. There will be links in the description of this video if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on Spotify, there will be links for you to listen to their wonderful podcast. There's a lot of fun, and hopefully have you back on in the future.
Awesome.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having us here. It's interesting to discuss the futures of Bond and Mission. I suppose by next time we'll be on, we'll have an idea of what's happening.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, no kidding.
Cool. Well, until next time, everyone, thanks for listening, and we will see you later.
The Secret Film.